So congratulations on the book. The book
Thank
is
you.
launching tomorrow. How are you feeling about it?
I'm feeling very nervous. I'm
Yeah.
really excited and can't wait to get it out in the world.
Amazing. Who over here has dreamt of having a side hustle and is here to understand how they can do that with their day jobs? Okay, cool. This is great. I'm going to ask a few questions and I'm going to have lots of time for you guys to ask a lot of questions as well. So please start thinking about them now. I actually want to start with the title,
Yes.
Bec. It feels to me like a very intentional title, and the components of it are very precise. It's not called How to Start a Business on the Side and Make It a Unicorn. So I'd love for you to speak to why you chose this title, and perhaps a little bit we could talk about how you came up with the title.
Yes, yeah. So if you just take the word hustle, it's quite a complicated word. It's got all the kind of shady intentions about it being a bit underhand. And there's this whole sort of what's called hustle porn now that goes on in the startup world about kind of, sleep when you're dead and work all the hours. And I quite liked the contradiction and the idea of trying to pair it with happiness and fulfilment and saying that, another way is possible. So there's kind of lots of complexity around the world, which I wanted to kind of lean into. But there's the title itself, but how I came up with it was a completely different process. And it wasn't actually intentional. That I had, when I wrote the proposal, so what you do with a non-fiction book is you write a proposal and then you get an agent and then the agent sends it into the publisher. And the publisher I got just went, "We don't like your first title, you have to have another one." And I was just like, "But that's my title." So what we did is brainstormed 57 different titles, which we tested with beta readers and all sorts of things, and narrowed it down. And you'll be pleased to hear we ended up with 5 that we Google AdWord tested. And Happy Hustle came top.
So according to what metric?
So we were just literally click-through rates.
Click-through rates.
So we were just trying to think, how do we do this? And we didn't, it was classic kind of smoke test. We didn't build anything. There wasn't anything that it linked through. It was just, what would people be interested? So it was clearly going to be a book, and which one would they click through on?
And the word hustle, you talked about it having sort of negative connotations, but it feels like it's something that I see quite a lot in the zeitgeist at the moment. Do you see this kind of, movement towards just not being an entrepreneur, but also thinking about having a can-do attitude to making things happen?
Yeah, I mean, people use, hustle as a verb, like I've got to get my hustle on, whether they're kind of marketing or selling or just being busy around something. And, that's one definition. It's just about being busy. But actually, for most of us now, we would see it as a side hustle. And that wouldn't have the kind of connotations around it. We would just say a lot of people have side hustles, and we would just see that as it's a job or a business or an idea that you have in addition to your main work.
So I totally understand that, and I know people obviously don't want to give up the security of their main gig and go off and do something. But I think another thing that stops people a lot is this idea of, I don't have an idea. And so I know a lot of people are like, I just want to start my own thing, but I don't have a good enough idea. And at least 1/3 of the book actually is talking about that ideas don't come from anywhere. You can actually, there is a process to getting these ideas. And a lot of what you talk about is spending time with the problem. So I'd love to understand, how can you do more of that? How can we all in this room, and we had a lot of people put up their hands for wanting to start their own thing or do a side hustle. How do you start existing in the world with that lens? And can you talk about some examples as well?
Yeah. So my background is working in innovation, and when I got my first job in innovation, I thought it was to come up with really crazy ideas and make them happen, like products and services, and do all of that. And then I realized that actually, once I was in the business, my job was really about culture change. My job was working with everyone throughout the business, giving them the tools and techniques so they had the confidence to have ideas. And actually ideas, they don't happen in a vacuum. And so the first part of the book was based on a workshop that I have run hundreds, if not thousands of times with loads of different people, from students and people in businesses, that takes people through a process, because innovation is a process. And that means there's tools and techniques that we can all learn and apply. It's not secret. You don't need to be a creative genius. You can try these practices and see what happens. And there's kind of two ways to start. So one is starting with a problem. And because a problem gives you the opportunity to come up with solutions. And if you're working by yourself or with other people, you will come up with those solutions based on your own skills and experience. And then if you work with other people and a bit more collaborative, you get a better diversity of solutions. But problems are brilliant triggers for ideas. And you can just start, gathering problems. So one example I use in the book was this brilliant club that I came across, and I don't know if swearing is okay for the video or for Google, because there's a group of guys based over in Bristol, and they met in a pub, and they decided they want to come up with an idea that would make them millions. So they all got together, right, let's have some ideas, and they couldn't do it. So what they realised is that they needed something to help them have the idea. So what they called it was the For Fuck's Sake Club, because when you come across those moments when you just go, oh, for fuck's sake, that's where you spot an opportunity. So they just started with themselves, thinking about what's tripping them up on their day-to-day, what's driving them mad, and then sharing those, pooling those problems together. And then with the club, they used to bring in other people. So they'd say, oh, why don't we work with cyclists? So they'd bring in somebody and kind of go, well, what's the set of problems that you face in that? They brought in somebody who was just had a baby, and they said, so what's going on there? So they could come up and they could listen. So you have to start with problems, and you start with people. And by having empathy, you can start to come up with those ideas.
And did you, in your own experience, because Bec has a startup and a side hustle of her own that she started when she was in publishing. It's a startup that helps, and correct me if I'm wrong, it helps writers kind of make sure that they're writing, because it's something that obviously you need a lot of self-motivation for. How did you see that problem? And then how did you go through that process yourself?
So my background is working in publishing, and I got this job which was running a writers' centre. So I moved from London up to Yorkshire, and it was in Ted Hughes. He was the laureate. He used to be married to Sylvia Plath. It's in his old house in this beautiful valley, and every week writers would come and they would have these dreams of wanting to write. And I found the longer I was there that the successful writers weren't the ones with either the best ideas or the best talent. It was the people who had the persistence to keep writing. And it was at the same time I was tracking everything on my Fitbit, and I was just really intrigued. I thought, like, can you apply sort of theories of behaviour change to a creative practice like writing? So that kind of led me into this sort of problem zone where I was like, what do writers struggle with? How can they build a habit? How can they finish their projects? And it just led me down to set up Prolifico.
Amazing. I love that it's also in the creative field, that ultimately it's the persistence, and you need sort of mechanisms in place to push that through. Sort of building on that, a lot of, once you say you've got your problem, you've spent 2 years sizing up what it looks like and all of that, how do you then think about the solution? Because a lot of, and this is what you'd speak about, is there is this kind of myth of the lone genius with this eureka idea, and then they go out into the world, and it's this pitch perfect thing that they then go and take into a VC or whatever and pitch for money. But there is then, after you've identified and worked out your problem, there is this whole thing of building the solution. And the solution is really where you're having the most fun and where you find a lot of the happy. So can you speak a little bit about that, and how do you, when you're trying to do this as a side hustle, how do you find the people in your network to help you build this once you've got that first problem?
So there's quite a few stages in that. So the first is if you've kind of come up with a problem and you know who has that problem, so you have a bit of an understanding about them and their lives and what they're kind of interested in and what the pain points are. You come up with solutions, and you come up with more than one. Because we have this, it's like founder bias. We fall in love with our first problem. And that's really important that you don't do that.
We're definitely keeping that in for the video.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So don't fall in love with your idea, and don't fall in love with the first one you have. Try to come up with alternatives, because you're more likely to have a better idea. And I kind of talk about how you choose ideas. And one way is to go and test them with people. So the idea of prototyping as quickly as possible. And a prototype doesn't necessarily have to be building something. So I would suggest people all the time, they always think, what's the smallest thing I can do now? What's the smallest thing I can do next? And it's more important that they do it and build that momentum, rather than keep waiting for when they've found the right person or found the right solution and build it. It's much better to get it out there. And a prototype can be as simple as, an elevator pitch. Give it a name and explain it to somebody in a sentence. It can be, your classic sort of faking something, build a landing page, build something that you can show to people. And I always suggest that you need to get it out in the world as quickly as possible. And again, that's a really sort of scary moment, particularly if you've come up with something and you really believe in it and you have to show to somebody. And so start with friendly faces, but you have to move quite quickly to your sort of the market, or who you think the market is, and start to get feedback. And the best test of an idea is if someone will pay for it.
Did you do that with the book?
Yes.
Did you?
Yeah, so
how did that work?
The whole book was tested in public with beta readers from, so I talked about the title going out there, but the first table of contents I did all the chapters, then did all the headings and the kind of what was in there. And it was like I think it was a 10-page document, it might have been a bit longer. And I just shoved it up on Google Docs and just got people to comment on it. And a lot of the people were in the target market, but I also asked experts, because they would just go, no, that's wrong, or that doesn't work like that. And you need expert feedback. And then I also had some friendly faces, some people I knew, I'd go, oh, this is amazing, congratulations. And thought, yes, so you have that mix of feedback to keep you going. And that really transformed how I thought about the book. And again, with the first draft, first drafts are horrible, but I set myself a goal to write the whole book in 100 days. I wrote it in 100 days while working full time, and then I sent that draft out to people, and it was hideous because I knew it was full of whatever errors and typos and just clumsy, badly written stuff. But it was like, actually, I needed to get it out there and found out what people think.
Yeah, and I guess it's through that process that it actually becomes something from a minimal viable product to something that actually is ready to shift.
Yeah.
So you did this in 100 days.
Yeah.
But a lot of what you say in the book is that it's about 10,000 hours of doing something before it becomes something that you can, really send out to the world.
Yeah.
Do you think that you could do it sort of either way? Obviously, you're sort of living proof that you don't have to spend 10,000 hours doing that. How does that work?
So the 10,000 hours, deliberate practice. So it's the idea that comes from a guy called Ericsson that was popularised by Gladwell, that it takes us 10 years to get really good at stuff. So for the last, 10 years or so, I have been blogging, I've been writing guest articles. I wrote a novel, I wrote a film. You write. And I think there's something around having a set of skills that you can leverage when you're ready to go. But I think there is always that dilemma that you can't wait, that it's the doing of that gets you good. So you don't wait for your 10,000 hours. You use what people think about with 10,000 hours, they often focus on the time rather than the deliberate nature of it. So there's a whole other set of elements, and some of them are around working with expert mentors to give you feedback on your process. And it's like putting that into your practice, whatever that practice is, as early as possible.
And is that where you find the happy in all of this? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think what is so interesting about your book is that is so much of what comes through right throughout the whole process is where you find the happy. And if this doesn't make you happy, then don't do it. But there is a way that you can make it something that's very pleasurable for you or give you a sense of purpose.
Yeah. So there's no getting away from it, that if you are going to have ideas and make them happen, it's going to involve hard work. So it's kind of that's the case. You can't really get away from it. But what was really interesting is when I first started, I asked people why they wanted to make ideas happen and, you know, what they struggled with around it. And the top reason really, really surprised me, because I thought people would want side hustles and to invent stuff and for money. You know, it's the classic, you do it for financial gain. I thought they'd want it for the skills. It would get them a new job. It would get them a promotion in their current job. It was none of that. The top reason was fulfilment.
Oh, wow.
So it was that kind of creative following a passion. And that kind of, that's where I kind of got the idea. So what's going on there? So what's kind of driving people? And there's been some really good research that's come out since my first sort of survey by Henley Business School, and they found exactly the same, that the top reason people have side hustles is for fulfillment and to get new experiences.
And it doesn't always have to be a business. I know you describe it as a business, but have you seen really good examples of people doing a hustle without it necessarily being something that...
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of the examples I use in the book, because it's really clear, solving problems. So particularly social enterprises that do that. And I think creative side projects, it's not about hobbies, but actually the same principles are in place. So if you want to create something and get it out into the world, you can still follow the same practice about growing an audience and testing it and finding out what people like and what works. So yeah.
Amazing. I'm going to ask everyone here to ask questions. My final question, or I have a few more, but I have loads. How do you want people to use this book? And I know you've got this really amazing index at the back, and for me, when I was reading it, I made a ton of notes. So you can see that I've got like lots of notes and lots of dog-eared going on. But and it feels like something that people can keep coming back to as like a really kind of guide in their book. Is that what you intended? How do you feel about what it should be in the world?
Yeah. So I think people will come to it for different reasons, and I kind of see the audience as people who have an idea but don't know how to get started and how to get it out in the world, and then people who haven't got an idea yet and want to build the kind of confidence and skills to get going. And the point is that it takes you all the way through, and there's loads of books on creativity and innovation, and there's loads of books on startups and growing a business. But I never found anything that started right at the beginning and then took people all the way through. So that was the kind of the idea, that kind of the map of the process, and that you would be able to go in. So though it starts at the beginning and towards growth, you might just focus on the bit that's about honing your idea, because so much of it is around constantly pivoting and learning and changing and experimenting, that most sort of, whether it's a startup or a side hustle, are sort of caught in that middle bit of the loop, figuring out, is this the right product? Is this the right market? Who am I serving? How do I change it? What does this look like? So there's quite a lot in the middle. I hope people will be able to sort of go back and get reassurance.
Actually, I do have one more question, because I was thinking about your startup and how you coach other people. Were you using the same the same sort of tips that you give the people on your writers' retreats, etc.? Did you find it hard to swallow your own medicine? How was that whole process? Yeah,
I've found that when I was writing a book on innovation, I had to use those principles, and it was like, I can't just do it without having lived it myself. But I found, so as I said, my background's in publishing and working with writers, and actually some of that early stage is very, very similar, particularly around finding the time. So as I said, one of the main barriers people have is, how the hell do they fit something like this into their already busy and overcommitted lives? And finding time, we've done a lot of work with writers over the years about how they schedule writing and find time. And it was exactly the same when I started digging into that with kind of founders and people with side hustles.
Amazing. Cool. I'm going to hand it over to the audience.
Hi, thank you for coming, by the way. I just wanted to ask, because you were talking about how people actually find the time to write. When you said that you spent, 100 days writing this book, do you often consider what it would be like if you had actually gone full-time into it? Do you feel like, because it seems as if side hustles inspire people to work harder.
Yeah.
So we leave our jobs and we're like, oh my God, I'm going to go home and do something crazy around whatever I'm interested in.
Yeah.
What if that became your main job? Do you think that would have been just as good or better? Or how do you think if you just spent your full time just working on that book?
So I've got so many answers, and I can talk a little bit about how people, there's 4 patterns how people find the time, and I can talk about those as well. But when I worked in innovation, we talked a lot about constraints. So constraints help you be a bit more creative. And the classic one is like, time and money really constrain you to act now. So I found that worked quite well for me. But I built in a whole bunch of accountability structures to make me write in that time. So I did not procrastinate. I didn't faff around. And when I did, I kind of really caught myself because I knew the clock was ticking. And I booked a co-working space right near where I live and work. And I went and hid there for 2 hours, 8 till 10 every morning. Didn't take my phone. I just wrote in that time. And then I would kind of come back and then start the day again. And that worked. That was my constraint.
Did you find that it helped you with your day job because you had that 8 to 10 where you started your head in a completely different place, or?
Yes. I mean, there's something about achieving your most important goal first thing in the morning. It's kind of like one of those sorts of, it's a real boost. So if you do something that really matters to you and you get it done first thing, it just gives you a real lift for the rest of the day. So yeah, there is kind of some psychology around that too.
Amazing.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Hi.
Hey.
Related to time, I think for me personally, it's also a question of having the mental space to do something. So I think very common to our organization, to the world in general, people do get mentally tired of doing their jobs. So it feels like, yes, sure, I can commit to this, but then will I be productive? The question is, do you find, first of all, maybe that just finding the time actually gives you that mental space, and what are the other tricks to actually, get that mental space to do something else?
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, there's so much around how we work now where we're constantly distracted that really depletes a lot of our energy. And there's a few things. There has been some research that shows that if you work at the opposite time to your optimum, so let's say you're a morning person, you would think, actually, I'm going to spend all time in the morning doing all my great stuff. You're more likely to be creative in the evening because you're tired. Plus, also, there's things about your how your I can't think of all. It's not adrenal and everything. All that, how your body changes throughout the day. That actually evening means you're less in that kind of I've got to do this next thing that you often get in the morning. So there isn't a perfect time for anyone to do something. I'll talk about these 4 patterns of time that we've observed and done some research into. So the classic one, which is the productivity advice that everyone is given, is about building a daily habit. And it is been proven to work, but I actually think it's a very negative thing because it's not possible for most of us and it makes most of us feel bad. So hearing that we've got to do something every single day is just annoying. It just doesn't work at all. The next approach, which is much more on the rise now amongst writers and knowledge workers, it's all the stuff that Cal Newport does around scheduling. And scheduling is incredibly effective. And we've actually found that it makes people feel far more productive. But there's rules around that. So you have to identify when you do the work, you have to schedule it, you have to stick to it. You've got to be seriously treat it like it's a commitment as important as a meeting with your boss, and not let it get eroded. and find times throughout a week where you can concentrate on whatever you're doing. So it could be a creative project, it could be writing, or it could be a sort of a side project or a side hustle. The other two patterns are spontaneous, and this works really well, particularly for people who have caring or parental responsibilities, because literally they just can't schedule anything. So it's that kind of grabbing 15 minutes here and there. So someone, the kid's napping, or if your meeting is delayed or trains cancelled, it's grabbing time when you find it. And then the final one is the classic, what's called a binge approach, which is sort of looking ahead. So I'm so busy, I can't do anything for 2 or 3 weeks or a month, but I'm going to block some serious time and go all in on something. And that works really well for people. What I suggest with everybody is you do the work and you spend a moment at the end. It's what we do a lot with writers. We get them to just think about when they're finished doing something, how did it go? What can I do differently? What can I do better next time? And then you start to figure out quite quickly what your pattern is like, what your energy is like. Are you creative? Those sorts of questions. Are you productive?
And do you take that element of self-reflection throughout the entire process? So yes, in terms of how do I categorize myself in these productivity types or how I use my time, but how else do you suggest people use that kind of self-reflection through this process if it is something that they're going to dedicate a lot of time? How does that work?
I think it's really important, so because we change all the time, so it's really, really helpful just to check in on yourself. So there are times in your life where you are busier and it's going to be impossible to, work daily on something or whatever it might be. But the process of reflection is all part of a broader experimental mindset that loads goes wrong when you make stuff happen, when you build something, if you get products out, even if it's a creative project, lots doesn't work. So it's actually really important that you reflect on it. And the whole purpose of an experiment is if it doesn't work, you haven't failed, it's just that experiment hasn't failed. And it takes out a lot of that kind of attachment we have, because otherwise we're just like, oh, it's just all gone wrong and I've failed and it doesn't work and it's a stupid idea and I'm just going to give up. And you just got to go, yep, it's gone horribly wrong and that was really embarrassing. What can I do about it? What can I do differently? How can I try again next time?
Yeah, and one of the things that you talk about in the book is knowing when to disattach from your original idea and to steer the course away from it. And sometimes you have to make the painful decision to walk away from the idea as well.
Yeah.
How do you know when to keep persevering and when to walk away?
I think that's probably one of the hardest questions to ever get right, because the other thing I've found that if you talk to a lot of founders, they're sort of hardwired for optimism. There's something about, I'll just give it another go. And it's really hard to figure out, should I persist? What if I just do one more push? What if I just try again? Will it work this time? With that kind of like, it's not getting anywhere. We all talk a lot around data and evidence and feedback, and anything that helps you get a slightly more objective view of what's going on there would be really helpful. But it's hard. I think that's the hardest thing for someone to figure out when they've invested time and money. That's the whole point about the sunk cost fallacy, is that you just invested everything and you just don't want to give up. Just one more go.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any other questions?
Have you noticed any differences between the US and the UK, or the US and EMEA? Because I think the US has quite an entrepreneurial society, whereas perhaps in EMEA less so.
Yes, loads more. And what was quite interesting is I interviewed a whole range of, more of the experts in the book are US, and then much more of the founders are UK. And I just think there's something, for me it was really important to have relatable examples. There's something about having someone who is a bit like you that makes you feel a bit more inspired to go out and do something. But yeah, the US has a very, very different mindset. Yeah.
From the UK, obviously you have a ton of the UK examples in here. Are there any that and you've got obviously Vikas Shah at the end who gives he gives you a forward, and he talks a lot about the sort of stress that he went through and then the sort of process he went to come out of all of that.
Yes.
Is there any other examples that you've seen that are great examples of people who look like they're really successful, or you can even speak about that one, and what it really takes actually to find the happy in all of this?
Yeah.
Hustle?
Success from the outside just is no reflection of what's really going on the inside. And we all create narratives and stories, and particularly if you deal with startups and founders, they're kind of pushed to create a story the whole time, which is their pitch or their kind of, how they came up with the idea or whatever. And it's a story, and it's helpful and it helps them communicate, but it's not who they are and what they're going through. And it's, in some ways, it seems so sort of trite to say that the things that keep you happy are the day-to-day things. It's not, people would be more likely to feel they've made progress, done something each day, than when they hit one of those really big milestones, because the big milestones are quite scary. So for me, I've wanted to write a book my whole life, and it's being published tomorrow, and all I am is just full of fear. But actually the whole process of it has been the best thing I've ever done and the most enjoyable thing I've ever done. Doesn't stop me feeling really, really scared about it.
Yeah. So everyone over here, I'm assuming a lot of people feel very time poor. And there's a bunch of sort of productivity hacks towards the end that actually really spoke to me in terms of, how you can start to think about your day. And you spoke a little bit about, starting the day off with something that is your own project. Is there anything else that has really worked for you, or you've seen work for other people to get their hustles going? Kind of building on that person's question as well.
So there is no productivity solution for everybody. I mean, we are all so different. We have different preferences. We have different commitments. My approach to pretty much everything is just experiment as quickly as you can. So whether it's the same with testing your idea, test your process, and you figure out how you get there. And there are loads, there's so many different ways to do that. But you find that there's something about, for me, it is really important to take quite small steps, because part of it is it overcomes a lot of the fear. So you're focused on what you can do next, making that really highly practical. You're more likely to be able to do it. And if you do that in quick succession, you build up momentum. And I find that you start out not having the time, but as you get more stuck into something, you become invested, you become more excited, you start to make the time for it. So there's a shift that happens from the kind of, I got this thing, I don't know quite what to do with it, I don't know quite how to fit it into my life. And you start working on it, and then you suddenly get going with it. And it has its own momentum, particularly if you get something out there. If somebody is, you could be blogging or posting stuff out there, some tips or whatever, and you've got an audience, suddenly you've got accountability. You've got people out there who are waiting for your next thing. And there's nothing to kind of keep you going more than having those sorts of structures in place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, hi, thanks for coming. So I found myself sometimes when I'm looking to do something new, I start the research, which could be, say, how to best make a how-to video on YouTube or make a certain type of website. And I feel that sometimes that for me becomes a bit of a black hole. I just end up spending so much time researching and then don't know when to move on to actually working on producing something. So how do you kind of find a balance? Do you have any tips about that?
So I run some workshops around procrastination, and the first thing I get people to do is to identify when they wanted to do something, what they do instead. So what their procrastination tendencies are. And I found when I was writing the book, when I had my 100 days, I would often sit down at my computer and I would do something like, well, I'm just going to organise all the interviews, or I'll allocate all the quotes. And I realised after a week or so that I wasn't writing. So what I thought I was doing was writing the book, where actually I was just procrastinating. So I had to realise that the activity, so research is a classic one for that. Planning is a classic one. So you sit down and go, I'm going to work on my idea now. And what you do is you get out your calendar and you plan it all, and you write the to-do list, and you set up a Trello board, and you spend all the time going, we're all organised, we're great to go. Oh, I've used all my time up. So part of it is catching yourself. And I find the tips around procrastination, there's a few things you can do for that. So you've got to notice them. The other one is you can use your procrastination tendency as a reward. So, for example, if you like to sit down and check Twitter as your warm-up, save that for the end of a session. And you can be quite ruthless. A lot of writers, people use Pomodoro timers, so it's just like that's your reward at the end of a session. The other thing is sometimes you do need to warm up. So it's like a ritual to get you going. But again, you have to go, okay, I've got an hour to work on this thing. I am going to spend the first 5 minutes doing the research, because that's going to get my head in the right place. I'm going to know what I'm doing. But you time block that and go, right, I've done my research. Now I've got to move on to the next thing. So literally identifying what that next thing is afterwards. But yeah, procrastination is fascinating.
Yeah.
But you still do need to actually.
You've got to do the thing.
Properly, maybe do it, and you'll be able to, if you do some proper research, you'll be able to
Yeah.
do it in 1 hour instead of 10.
Yeah, so again, give a constraint. So constraints are really, really helpful. So again, a lot of it that holds us back is confidence. So we just go, okay, I'm just going to launch a whole YouTube channel. We rarely would do that. Some people might do that, but most of us would go, well, I'm going to do the research, and I'm going to set it up, and I'm going to come up with the right name. And it's like, actually, you might need to do those things, but give yourself a certain amount of time to do them. Put them in a bit of a timeline. Do them in the right order, and limit it.
Was there another?
Hey, thanks for coming. Do you feel like, so having a side hustle obviously consumes a lot of time, and Google likes to promote people have a well-balanced lifestyle. Do you feel like having a side hustle sort of causes people to have an unbalanced lifestyle? And do you believe that an unbalanced lifestyle is needed to have a well-balanced lifestyle, if you get what I mean?
It's a really good question.
It's a really
and
good
we were discussing this outside.
Yeah.
And she got promoted when she was doing that.
So I think, so again, it goes back to the complexity around the hustle word, that it is hard work. So you have to accept that. And I think some research, again, that's come out from Henley have said that it takes, on average, for most people who have a side hustle, it takes them about a day a week, which is quite a scary amount. And I think it does take up your time. And I think there is also something around about being slightly out of balance to help you find your balance. It's almost like you've got to figure out when you have worked a little bit too hard to work out what it looks like when you don't. And I think what's really negative around the whole kind of a lot of the startup language and this think big and the hustle hard is that it just focuses on that, and it's not good for you, it's not good for your health, it's not good for your mental health, it's not good for your relationships. I think it is completely possible to do stuff and enjoy it. And for me, when I was getting my Prolifico off the ground, it was a classic side hustle. I had a job, but I told my bosses about it, and it got me a promotion because they knew I was learning all this great stuff, and they wanted that to come in-house and to do more of that. So I think there's something around how you figure out the boundaries, who you tell about it, who supports you in that. Because the other thing is you just kind of go, right, that's it, I'm going to leave my job, I'm going to go all in. And it's like, actually, there is this period where you have to do two until you almost can't do the both together.
And that's when you leave your day job
That's
to...
when you've got enough money or enough users, or you've got enough traction to be able to get investment, or whatever you think that metric is, that would help you make that decision.
Have you seen anyone who has a sustainable side hustle for a long period of time without any intention of leaving their day job? Can you speak about some of those examples?
I'm just trying to think of a really good... There's one in the book, and she has no intention of leaving her job. And again, the research has found that from Henley, that loads of people don't want to do that, because again, it goes back to why you want to start something. So some of us have amazing jobs, some of us have really boring jobs. Some jobs, however great they are, only use part of your skills or your passion or your experience. And actually, it's really nice to have something on the side that makes you feel like you're living a fuller life, actually, or that you're exploring something. So that's why so many people have, creative hobbies, because work often isn't creative enough. Even if you're working in a creative sector, you still need an outlet for that. And I think for lots of us, it's just really great to have, this is my 9 to 5 or my 7 till 8 or whatever it ends up being. And then there's this other stuff I do that makes me feel like me.
Yeah. And is there somewhere where a hobby ends and your hustle begins? And did you play around with what that looks like?
I did. So it's generally around money. So the idea of a hobby is often an end in itself. It's not something you do for particularly for money or an audience or something. It can just be pure fun, and that's great. And I do think my next book, I want to focus specifically on creatives, because I do find that fascinating. Because many of you might not want to start up side businesses, but you just want to have time to do the stuff that you enjoy doing. And I think that is hard as well, because it's like what motivates people to get started on something where there's no obvious reward. They're not on a journey to leave their job or earn extra income or something like that. They're just doing it for pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the more difficult... Oh, there's a question there. So I'll ask my question in a second.
Thank you. And thank you so much for coming here. I had a question that when you actually start a hustle or a side business, how important is the role of packaging, positioning, and networking? If you could just elaborate by citing example of your own journey or anybody else that you've mentioned in the book.
So part of it's around the product and the marketing, and the other one is around the networking. And I would say if we start around the network, because a lot of what you do is you've got an idea, you've got to get it out into the world, and it's got to be used by people. So you start to build networks of whether they are, users, fans, a community of people who give you feedback in the first place. You need to get to that as quickly as possible. And then you also need to build networks of, it could be advisors or people on the same journey. And it's overused a lot, the phrase, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But it's actually a really, really important principle to have in mind, because you need to surround yourself with people who support you in what you're doing or are going through a similar thing. And I found this a lot when I was at the Writers' Centre, that people would come from whatever their walks of life were. And it was the first time for many of them that they said, oh, I want to be a writer. And actually, that's what people cared about. No one really cared what their jobs were, where they lived, were they married, did they have children, any of the kind of chit-chat they do. And it suddenly gave them a group, and that you found after the week had finished that loads of them stayed in contact. And within writing, writers' groups are just all over the place. That's what people do to build accountability, to get feedback, and just that kind of cheerleading and shoulders to cry on. So I would say networks are absolutely fundamental to building something. And the idea of packaging and brand, just absolutely. But get stuff out quickly, test it, see what works. And for some people, that might be your comfort zone. So if a lot of you are in sales and marketing, that's a real skill. So it's like, actually, we'll work on this bit because I know what I'm doing here. And that can give you momentum again and get some quick wins, where there's other stuff that you have no idea what you're doing at all. But you do need to work on the uncomfortable stuff as well.
I want to pick up on her question on the networking part of it. So I think everyone has people in their lives that detract from what they're trying to do. How do you, and I feel like networking has a very negative connotation, especially in the UK, and that's probably a massive difference between the UK and the US. How do you feel, what have you seen works well for people to do it in a bit more of a seamless way, and to identify the people who are actually going to help them with their hustle versus detract them? If the 5 people that you spend the most time with is the sum of you, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I think what we think about of networking is like going to a drinks party where you don't know anybody and you have to hand out a business card. And I don't even know if that happens anymore. Does that really happen? Has anybody done that? I don't know. I mean, I would never do that. I couldn't do that. I would be too shy. It'd be hideous. I find that as soon as you start to put yourself out there, you find networks quite quickly. So if it was a product or a service, I mean, in London there's how many meetups every single night of people who are makers or wanting to start a startup, how many events there are. And once you have a shared interest, then you've got something in common and it's easier to start having a conversation. There's so many online networks and communities that people can join. I mean, the first one I joined was Ada's List for women in tech. And it just transformed me in the early stages where I had all of these really stupid questions. It's how I found a mentor. One of the founders of it, Anjali, she's interviewed in it. And actually it feels quite, you find a safe space for you. So if it was writing or creative, you just join a group of people with that same interest and suddenly you build an alliance. I think it is quite organic, but you've got to kind of step out and try something.
And you have to put yourself out there in a way. Yeah, absolutely.
You recommend ensuring you can maintain the happiness without something just succumbing to being a complete drag or a chore and getting into a grind rather than being a happy hustle?
Yes, yeah. I feel like I'm repeating myself talking about it's getting to know yourself. It's getting to sort of reflect on it. And sometimes it's just when you are overwhelmed, it's generally take a break or have a nap. Things like that. Anything that gives you a bit of distance or perspective would make a huge, huge difference. And understanding that it's not going to be loads of fun all the time. You know, you're not going to be happy all the time. But there's something about working on the hard stuff which is really fulfilling, and it's a different level of sort of happiness. But no, it's notice what's going on with you. Notice if it's still working for you. And accepting when you don't have the time, when you don't have the energy, when it's not working, and taking a step back from things.
Cool.
Yeah.
Rob's telling me I have one more question. One last one. Amazing.
Amber.
Thank you for taking one more question. So, somebody can call it procrastination, but I often, see myself being torn between training for what I want to do, because obviously you want to be good enough and you want to really have a good output, and then also, thinking that whatever I put should better be good. Otherwise, if it's not good, then I wouldn't have a lot of takers. So, I mean, is this really procrastination? Because I know somebody asked about that. Or is it really important to really do those courses, think about, how you would present or position your product? So, there's this dilemma that I have, and it would be great to hear your experience.
So I don't necessarily think it's procrastination. It's probably perfectionism. And I would still advocate that you're better off getting a smaller version out faster and getting feedback than making something perfect, because it will never be perfect. And the whole idea around whether you call it, you know, fail fast or fail forward or iterate or all of those sorts of principles is you've just got to get something out there and see how it lands, and choosing the right audience for that first thing, because we'll never finish anything if we wait for it to be perfect, and it might be perfect. It's what's that? Done is better than perfect. It's just, you know, get something out into the world, see what people like about it, and follow that. I would always say stop being perfectionist. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect place to end, actually. It's exactly what the book is about, and you've summed it up, and there's so much great detail, and everyone over here has the book. Encourage you to read it. It took me, I read it this weekend, and all about making my hustle happen now. So if you want inspiration, this book will definitely provide it and give you the tools to do that. Thank you so much for coming. I wish you every success for your book.
Thank you.
And hope it goes really well tomorrow.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.